The bell above the door jingled as Elon Musk walked into the diner. It was just another ordinary afternoon for most people, but for him, it felt like an escape, one he desperately needed. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, and the hum of casual conversation from a few late lunch-goers created a comforting buzz in the background. He had been here many times before. This diner was one of several properties he owned, but today, he wasn't the tech mogul who had revolutionized the electric car industry or sent rockets into space. No, today, he was simply another customer, just like anyone else who might walk through that door. His reason for choosing today, of all days, to slip in unnoticed was simple: curiosity. Elon was tired of hearing about the work culture within his companies, about how his employees felt disconnected and underappreciated. His companies were growing at a staggering pace, but sometimes, he wondered whether the speed of their success had come at the cost of meaningful relationships. He was beginning to realize that he was just a name to many of his employees, someone they'd never actually met, someone who was far removed from their everyday lives. Today, he was going to do something different. He was going to experience it for himself. As he walked toward the counter, he noticed the two cashiers behind the register. They looked like they were in their mid-20s, neither of them particularly enthusiastic about being there, but they were doing their jobs. Their names were stitched onto their aprons: Samantha and Jessica. Elon couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort as he took a seat at the far end of the counter, keeping his head down, hoping no one would recognize him. A few minutes passed, and the diner's quiet ambience was interrupted by the clattering of plates and the occasional murmur of customers. It wasn't until the conversation between Samantha and Jessica caught his attention that the situation took a sudden turn. "I swear, I could be doing something more than this," Samantha said, her voice tinged with frustration as she wiped down the counter. "I mean, like, I'm way overqualified for this job. But it's just easier to stay here than do anything else, you know." Jessica, who had been sorting through the receipt printer, glanced up and nodded. "I get it. This place is easy. But have you ever thought about what it's like to work for someone like him?" She gestured toward the wall where a framed picture of Elon Musk hung, his face frozen in a perfect smile. "The guy who owns this place. I don't know, he's got all the money in the world but doesn't care about the people doing the real work." Elon froze. He could feel his heart skip a beat. "The guy who owns this place," he thought to himself, his stomach twisting into knots. "Are they talking about me?" Samantha laughed softly, a bitter edge to her voice. "I mean, it's not like we even see him around here. He probably doesn't even know we exist. It's just, you know, he's out there with his big tech stuff, and we're stuck making sandwiches and serving coffee." Jessica shrugged. "Yeah, I guess. But there's nothing wrong with a steady job. It pays the bills. It's just, doesn't feel like we're appreciated, you know." Elon sat there, feeling the weight of every word they spoke. His mind raced. He had heard similar complaints before, but hearing it directly from his own employees, without them knowing who he was, hit differently. This wasn't just a passing comment, this was their reality. A reality where they felt disconnected, unimportant, and taken for granted. He had always been a man of action, someone who could fix problems with his vast resources, but this wasn't something he could simply fix with a new business initiative or a big financial investment. There was a strange quietness in his chest. He had built companies that reached the stars, but he had failed to reach the hearts of the people who worked under him. And now, here he was, listening to his own employees talk about how they felt insignificant, like pieces of a machine that nobody cared to tune up or appreciate. For the next several moments, Elon simply sat there, his sandwich untouched, his mind running through a storm of emotions. He was tempted to get up and reveal who he was, confront them, and somehow explain himself. But something told him that wouldn't be the right move. What would it prove? That he could scare them into behaving differently? That he could be their boss again, demanding their respect because of his position? No. That wasn't what this was about. Instead, he stayed silent. He listened. Samantha continued, unknowingly talking about the man sitting just a few feet away from her. Honestly, though, I think the whole big boss thing is overrated. Like, people think that just because they have money or power, they automatically earn respect. But respect is earned, not given. She paused and looked over at Jessica. Maybe we should start a petition for better treatment around here. If we're working this hard, we deserve more than just a paycheck and a good job. We deserve to be seen. Jessica nodded again. Yeah, I'm all for that. I don't know if it'll make a difference. People at the top don't really care, do they? Elon's heart tightened. He realized, for the first time in a long while, that he didn't just need to be seen in the eyes of the world, he needed to be seen by the people closest to him, the ones whose hard work kept everything moving. But here he was, sitting in the diner, barely even noticed by the very people who made his businesses run. His mind shifted back to the way he had built his empire. SpaceX had changed the way humanity thought about space. Tesla had revolutionized the auto industry. He was used to making the impossible happen, but the conversations taking place around him revealed a different kind of challenge, one that didn't involve rockets or electric cars but human connection. It was a challenge he had ignored for too long. The diner had always been a small, inconsequential piece of his vast empire, but right now, it was everything. His own employees were questioning him, and the sad truth was, he had no answer for them. He had no way of proving that he cared about them, because he had never really tried. Elon stood up from the counter, his decision made. He walked out the door, but as he stepped back into the sunlight, something in him had changed. This wasn't just a small, forgettable moment. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would require more than just his technological expertise. It would take heart. It would take listening. And most importantly, it would take change. As he left the diner behind, he couldn't help but wonder, how many other places in his life were like this? How many other people were out there, feeling just as invisible? And, most importantly, what could he do to make sure they were seen? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk sat in his car, parked in front of the diner, staring out at the building as the late afternoon sunlight bathed its facade. The distant hum of the city felt muffled, almost irrelevant compared to the thoughts swirling in his mind. He hadn't anticipated this feeling. He had expected frustration, maybe even anger, but not this, a quiet, unsettling realization that he had been overlooking something fundamental in his pursuit of innovation and success. He had spent years building his companies, creating world-changing technologies, and leading teams of brilliant minds. But in that brief moment inside the diner, listening to the casual grievances of his employees, he realized how distant he had become from the very people who made everything possible. Elon leaned back in his seat, letting out a deep breath as he reflected on the path that had led him here. It wasn't just the diner or the conversation between Samantha and Jessica that troubled him, it was the overarching pattern that had followed him for most of his career. From a young age, he had always been consumed by his dreams. The boy who had once read books on rocket science and physics before bed was now the man who had sent a Tesla Roadster into space and was building reusable rockets to make space travel a reality. But along the way, he had sacrificed connection for efficiency, results over relationships. He thought back to his childhood. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon had always been the outsider, the kid who wasn't afraid to be different. He was bullied for his awkwardness, his curiosity, and the way his mind seemed to race 1,000 miles a minute. But that never stopped him. If anything, it made him more determined to prove his worth, to create something that would change the world. His parents had divorced when he was young, and he often felt alone, retreating into books, video games, and his imagination to escape the chaos around him. Even at an early age, he had an undeniable drive to understand how things worked, whether it was dismantling his toys to figure out how they ticked or dreaming up futuristic inventions that no one could quite grasp. When he moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, then to the University of Pennsylvania in the US, Elon's ambition only intensified. He saw himself as a visionary, someone destined to shape the future. But somewhere along the way, that vision became more about proving himself to the world and less about connecting with the people who helped make that future a reality. As he rose to prominence with PayPal, then with Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures, his life became a blur of meetings, investor calls, and product launches. The company culture he created was one of intense focus, relentless work ethic, and groundbreaking innovation. It had earned him the nickname, the real-life Tony Stark, and in many ways, he embraced that persona. But it came at a cost. Elon had always demanded excellence from his employees, sometimes pushing them beyond their limits in pursuit of perfection. But in doing so, he had failed to see the bigger picture. His companies were full of people who were smart, talented, and passionate, but they were also human, with their own struggles, hopes, and dreams. And somewhere in the relentless push for progress, he had forgotten to nurture those aspects of his workforce. He thought about the early days of Tesla, when it was just him and a small team working out of a cramped office, desperate to prove that electric cars weren't just a pipe dream. Those were the days when he had been closer to his employees, when the line between boss and colleague was blurred. They had fought side by side, working late into the night, sharing a sense of purpose that went beyond just building a company. It was about changing the world. But over the years, as Tesla and SpaceX became global giants, Elon had retreated more and more into the role of the visionary, the one who would provide direction and leadership but not necessarily engage in the day-to-day struggles of his employees. The gap had grown, and now, standing outside the diner, he could feel it more than ever. He thought back to the conversation he had overheard. Samantha and Jessica weren't the only ones who felt this way. How many other employees were there, in all his companies, who felt invisible? How many were silently struggling with the feeling that they were just cogs in a machine that didn't truly see them? A feeling of guilt crept up on him. These were the people who believed in his vision, who worked tirelessly to turn his dreams into reality. And yet, here they were, feeling unseen and unappreciated. The weight of that realization was heavy. Elon's hand gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. He had built his empire on the idea of innovation, of breaking barriers, and of making the impossible possible. But the most important breakthrough, the one he had ignored for so long, was the need for connection. He remembered a conversation he had had with his father years ago. His father had told him that no amount of success would make up for the lack of meaningful relationships in life. At the time, Elon had dismissed it. His focus had been solely on building, on achieving greatness. But now, he understood the truth in those words. He could change the world with his inventions, but could he change the world by changing the way he treated people? Could he truly lead a revolution, not just in technology, but in how people connected with each other, especially in the workplace? Elon knew that in order to truly lead, he needed to do more than just push his companies toward greater technological achievements. He needed to be present for his people. He needed to listen to their concerns, to understand their challenges, and to show them that they mattered. It wasn't about being a distant figurehead, it was about being a part of the team. A new idea began to form in his mind, an idea that would take him on a journey far beyond the realms of rockets and electric cars. He needed to rebuild not just his companies, but the culture within them. And the first step in that journey was understanding the struggles of his employees, the people who made everything possible. Elon knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, resistance, and a lot of hard work. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. This was the next big challenge in his life, the one that could change everything, not just for him, but for the people who had helped him get to this point. With a deep breath, Elon started the engine and pulled away from the diner. As he drove off, he couldn't help but think, this was just the beginning. The days that followed his visit to the diner felt strangely empty, despite the relentless barrage of meetings, emails, and phone calls that continued to demand his attention. Elon Musk was used to working at breakneck speed, always on the move, always planning the next big thing. But now, each moment seemed suspended, as if the weight of his own realization was settling in on his shoulders, one heavy piece at a time. Elon had spent the past week reflecting. The moment in the diner had served as a wake-up call, forcing him to confront the fact that he had been neglecting the very thing that made his company successful, the people. He had poured countless hours into launching rockets, pushing the boundaries of electric vehicle technology, and building companies that changed entire industries. But somehow, in his relentless pursuit of excellence, he had neglected the human connections that were at the core of his success. He had been the visionary, the leader who saw the big picture, but he had missed the small, crucial details. His employees weren't just there to work for him, they were the ones who made his dreams possible. Without them, his empire would crumble. Elon sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, staring out the window at the sprawling campus below. He had always felt a sense of pride when looking out at the world he had built, the gleaming, futuristic buildings, the bustling factories, and the innovation humming at every corner. But today, the view felt different. It no longer filled him with pride. Instead, it reminded him of the disconnect he had seen in that diner, the same disconnect that was starting to seep into every corner of his life. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The thought of going back to his old ways, of continuing to work from behind the curtain without truly engaging with the people who made it all possible, felt impossible now. The question now was, what could he do to fix it? Elon's first instinct was to throw a big company-wide initiative into motion. He was a man of action, after all. He thought about launching a new program, perhaps an employee feedback system or a series of town hall-style meetings where employees could voice their concerns directly to him. But as he sat there, thinking about it, he realized something: those kinds of top-down solutions weren't going to work. He needed something more personal. More genuine. He needed to experience what his employees experienced, to truly understand their challenges and concerns. A thought struck him: what if he went undercover? What if he could put himself in the shoes of an employee, experiencing the day-to-day grind of his companies firsthand, without anyone knowing who he was? It wasn't a new idea. Elon had seen the concept of undercover boss play out on TV, but it had always felt like a gimmick. This would be different. He wasn't doing it for a publicity stunt. He wasn't doing it to make a point to the media. He was doing it because he needed to understand. He needed to listen. He smiled to himself, the idea giving him a spark of excitement. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt the adrenaline of a new challenge coursing through his veins. But this challenge wasn't about space exploration or autonomous driving, it was about the people who had made everything else possible. The next day, Elon took action. He started by calling up the management team at Tesla's Fremont factory. He told them that he was going to be stepping into the shoes of an ordinary employee, working a shift just like anyone else. Of course, they were skeptical. The idea of their CEO working on the factory floor was almost laughable, but Elon insisted that he didn't want anyone to know who he was. He would work just like any other employee, without any special treatment or accommodations. He then reached out to some of his other companies, SpaceX, the Boring Company, and even his smaller ventures, and arranged for similar undercover stints. He was determined to immerse himself in the daily lives of his employees, to understand what motivated them, what frustrated them, and what made them feel invisible. The first stop was Tesla's Fremont factory, a sprawling campus where thousands of employees worked day and night to build some of the most advanced electric vehicles in the world. Elon had visited the factory countless times over the years, but never as an ordinary worker. This time, he would be doing something completely different. The night before he was due to start his first undercover shift, Elon couldn't sleep. He was used to high-stakes situations, launching rockets into space, sending cars into orbit, building cars with self-driving capabilities, but this was different. This wasn't about technology or innovation. This was about people. His people. The next morning, Elon arrived at the factory dressed in plain clothes. He had a baseball cap on, sunglasses, and a simple work jacket to blend in. His goal was to be as anonymous as possible, to experience life on the factory floor without anyone recognizing him. He didn't want any special treatment, and he certainly didn't want anyone to treat him like the boss. He was assigned to a small team working on the production line, putting together parts for the Model 3. The workers were a mix of seasoned veterans and new hires, all focused on their tasks with a quiet intensity. As the hours passed, Elon found himself working side by side with people who were focused on doing the best job they could, despite the challenges they faced. It didn't take long for him to notice the small but significant details that made the job difficult. The factory floor was loud, the work was physically demanding, and the hours were long. But what struck him most was the feeling of disconnect. Employees worked diligently, but there was an undercurrent of dissatisfaction in the air. Conversations were brief, and there was a noticeable lack of camaraderie between the workers. It wasn't that anyone was unkind, it was just that the day-to-day grind had worn people down. The workers didn't feel like they were part of something bigger. They felt like parts of a machine, churning out product after product, without ever really seeing the impact of their work. Elon found himself reflecting on the conversations he had overheard at the diner, the ones that had made him feel uncomfortable and uneasy. He had assumed that the workers at Tesla were all committed to the company's mission, to the larger vision of transforming the world through electric vehicles. But now, standing on the factory floor, he realized that many of them didn't feel that connection. They were just going through the motions, putting in their time for a paycheck and hoping for something more. As the shift came to an end, Elon took a moment to speak with some of the workers. He didn't reveal who he was, of course, but he asked them about their experiences, about what they liked and didn't like about their jobs. And as they spoke, something became clear: the workers wanted more. They wanted to feel seen, heard, and valued, not just for their work, but as people. They wanted to know that their efforts were contributing to something meaningful. As Elon drove home that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just scratched the surface. The experience had been eye-opening, but it was only the beginning. He knew that in order to truly understand the needs of his employees, he would have to keep going, keep listening, keep learning, and, most importantly, keep changing. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, resistance, and moments of doubt. But Elon Musk had always embraced challenges before. Now, he had a new one that was more personal than any of the others. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it. The following weeks were a blur of factory shifts, office visits, and countless hours spent working alongside employees at Tesla, SpaceX, and even the Boring Company. Elon Musk had immersed himself in the daily grind of his businesses, always careful to keep his true identity hidden. Each time he suited up in his plain clothes and adopted a new persona, he felt a strange sense of liberation, as though he had shed the weight of being the boss and was simply a part of the team. It was humbling, but it was also eye-opening in ways that he hadn't expected. Every shift, every conversation, and every task he completed was adding a layer to his understanding of what his employees were going through. And what he was discovering was not always easy to swallow. One afternoon, after working a shift assembling parts for the Tesla Model Y at the Fremont factory, Elon found himself sitting on a brake bench, chatting with two young employees, Kevin and Lila. They were in their 20s, bright-eyed and full of energy, but the weight of their tiredness was visible in their eyes. They spoke casually at first, discussing the mundane aspects of factory life, how monotonous the work could get, how much they appreciated the recent improvements to the brake area, but then the conversation took a turn. Kevin, the more outspoken of the two, mentioned the increasing pressure to meet production quotas. "You know, sometimes it feels like we're just numbers on a spreadsheet," Kevin said, shaking his head. "It's all about efficiency, speed, getting things done faster. But we're only human, right?" Lila nodded in agreement, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Yeah. I've been working here for almost 2 years now, and at first, it was exciting. But after a while, it starts to feel like we're just cogs in a machine. And when you make a mistake, it's like you're letting everyone down. But they don't ever really explain why it matters, you know. It's just about the numbers." Elon had heard complaints before. He knew the demands of the job could be grueling. But hearing this firsthand from employees who genuinely cared about the company was different. Kevin and Lila weren't just complaining for the sake of it, they were trying to understand why they were putting in long hours and exhausting themselves day after day. They wanted to feel like their work was meaningful. As the conversation continued, Elon realized something profound. The workers in the factory didn't necessarily need more money or more perks, though those things were certainly appreciated. What they truly needed was a sense of purpose, a deeper connection to the mission they were working toward. They didn't want to be seen as expendable, they wanted to know that their contributions mattered in the grand scheme of things. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his car, reflecting on the conversation, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had always been so focused on the big picture, on sending rockets to Mars, on revolutionizing the automotive industry, that he had neglected the human side of his companies. The people who were on the ground, building those products day after day, were the ones who made those grand visions a reality. But he had failed to make them feel valued, to make them feel like they were part of something bigger than just the work they did. That realization hit him hard. The road to innovation wasn't just about cutting-edge technology and high-speed production, it was about making people feel like they were an integral part of that journey. Elon had built some of the most ambitious projects the world had ever seen, but in doing so, he had overlooked the importance of human connection. The next day, he visited SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, once again adopting his undercover persona. This time, he was assigned to the engineering department, working alongside a team of engineers tasked with developing the next generation of Falcon rockets. It was a high-pressure environment, filled with intense problem-solving, long hours, and high expectations. Elon observed the team closely, trying to gauge how they interacted with one another, how they handled the constant demands of their work. The engineers were brilliant, no question about it. But as he spent more time with them, he began to notice a trend. They were isolated. The team members had a clear sense of mission, but there was a palpable distance between them. There was no sense of camaraderie or unity, despite the groundbreaking work they were doing. During one particularly tense moment in the workshop, Elon overheard a conversation between two engineers, Sarah and Mark. They were discussing the stress of meeting deadlines and the mounting pressure to perform. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up with this pace," Sarah said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's like no one cares about how hard we're working. They just want results, fast." Mark sighed. "Yeah, I hear you. But what can we do? We're on a deadline. And if we don't deliver, someone else will. They'll find someone else to do it." Elon's heart sank. The conversation was eerily similar to the one he had overheard between Samantha and Jessica at the diner. It was the same sense of detachment, the same feeling of being expendable. The engineers were pushing themselves to the limit, but their work was no longer about the joy of solving complex problems, it was about meeting expectations, about the fear of failure. Elon had built a company known for innovation, for taking risks and pushing boundaries. But he had never fully understood the toll that constant pressure took on his employees. The stress, the burnout, the sense that no matter how hard they worked, it would never be enough to satisfy the ever-growing demands. The more Elon observed, the more he realized that these were not just isolated incidents. This was the culture he had fostered without even realizing it. A culture that prioritized results over people. A culture that placed immense pressure on individuals without offering them the support they needed to succeed in a sustainable way. He had always viewed himself as someone who could shoulder the burden of leadership, someone who could take on the weight of the world and still keep moving forward. But now he saw that leadership wasn't just about pushing the envelope and leading by example. It was about creating an environment where people felt empowered, where they felt like they were part of a team that genuinely cared for one another. Elon knew that change wouldn't come overnight. There were no easy solutions, no quick fixes. But he also knew that something had to change. He had the power to make it happen, to create a culture where employees felt seen, heard, and valued, not just as workers, but as people. As he drove back to his hotel that night, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose rising within him. It was time to make a shift in how he led, a shift in how his companies operated. He didn't just want to build rockets to Mars or electric cars for the world, he wanted to build something more, a company culture that inspired people to give their best, not out of fear, but out of a shared belief in the mission. And in that moment, Elon Musk realized that the true innovation he needed to pursue wasn't just technological. It was personal. It was about connecting with his people, listening to them, and showing them that they mattered. The journey was just beginning. The weeks continued to blur together as Elon Musk's undercover journey unfolded. With each new company, each new shift on the factory floor or in the workshop, he found himself learning something new, not just about his businesses, but about himself. It was one thing to be a visionary leader at the helm of multiple groundbreaking companies, but it was something else entirely to experience the daily struggles, frustrations, and joys of the people who brought his ideas to life. In the middle of it all, Elon was confronted with a question that felt more personal than anything he had encountered before: who was he, really? As his experiences deepened, he found himself in situations where he was forced to reckon with his own flaws, his own limitations as a leader. It wasn't just the people he had been overseeing that were affected by his decisions, it was him too. The constant pursuit of greatness had led him to neglect certain parts of himself, his ability to connect, to empathize, to lead with a sense of emotional intelligence. One evening, after spending a grueling shift assembling parts for the Tesla Cybertruck prototype, Elon found himself alone in his office. He sat in the dimly lit room, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, his mind spinning. The events of the past few days had left him feeling shaken. He thought back to the workers he'd met, their exhaustion, their frustration, their desire for something more. He thought about the engineers at SpaceX, their relentless drive, and the cracks in their morale. And most haunting of all, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversations he had overheard at the diner. The weight of it all was heavy, too heavy to ignore. He had been running at full speed for years, always chasing the next big breakthrough, always focused on the future. But in the process, he had lost sight of the present, the people who were walking beside him on this journey. It wasn't just about leading a team, it was about connecting with them, understanding them, and showing them that their struggles were not invisible. Elon leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. The familiar feeling of self-doubt began to creep in, something he rarely allowed himself to entertain. Was he a good leader? Was he truly the person he wanted to be, the person his companies needed him to be? The thought of it made his stomach churn. He wasn't used to questioning himself, not in this way. But as the reality of the situation sank in, he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. The answers weren't simple. The path forward wasn't clear. But the first step, he realized, was to face the mirror. The next morning, Elon made a decision. He would confront the issues head-on, but not just from the standpoint of change within the workplace. He would face the emotional side of leadership, something he had never truly embraced. He needed to understand not just the problems, but the deeper connections that were missing. He called a meeting with his inner circle, the top executives at Tesla, SpaceX, and his other companies. They all gathered in the conference room, their faces expectant, as they waited for him to speak. Elon stood at the front, taking a deep breath before beginning. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "And I realize that I've been focused too much on the tech, on the product, on the future. But I've been neglecting the people who make all of this possible. You." The room fell silent. His team was used to hearing Elon speak with unshakable confidence, his words precise and driven by the force of his vision. But today, there was something different in his tone. Vulnerability. "I've been undercover at our factories and offices," Elon continued, his gaze steady as he met the eyes of each person in the room. "I've worked alongside some of the employees you oversee. And what I've learned is that there's a disconnect. The people we lead don't feel valued. They don't feel like they're part of something bigger. They're working hard, but they don't see the impact of their efforts. They're tired, frustrated, and often feel invisible. A few of the executives exchanged glances, and there was a noticeable tension in the room. Some looked uncomfortable with Elon's words, as if they weren't quite sure how to respond to the rawness of his admission. But this has to change, Elon said, his voice firm once more. We have to do better by our people. We're not just building cars and rockets. We're building a future, yes, but we're also building a culture. A culture that values hard work, yes, but also values human connection. We need to make our employees feel like they matter. Elon paused, letting the weight of his words settle. For a moment, the room remained quiet, the executives processing what he had said. Finally, one of the senior engineers, Marcus, spoke up. You're right, Elon. We've all been so focused on the next breakthrough, the next launch, the next product. But we've neglected the very thing that makes all of that possible, the people. If they're not engaged, if they don't feel valued, then none of this matters. Elon nodded, his eyes meeting Marcus's with gratitude. Exactly. It's not enough to just give them a paycheck. We need to show them that they're integral to the vision. We need to be transparent with them, listen to them, and provide opportunities for them to grow, not just professionally, but personally too. The room was still, but it felt as though the first real conversation about culture and leadership was beginning to take shape. No one knew exactly how to implement these changes, but there was a sense of collective understanding. Something had to shift. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Elon left the meeting that day with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the path ahead wouldn't be quick or simple. There were years of ingrained habits and corporate systems to undo. There would be resistance, both from the top and from the bottom. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right track. This wasn't just about creating products that changed the world, it was about creating an environment where the people who made those products felt connected to the mission, respected for their efforts, and valued for their contributions. The hard work was just beginning. The days that followed the meeting with his executives were filled with a flurry of activity. Elon had always been a man of action. When he set his mind to something, he moved quickly. But this time, it wasn't about launching a new product or developing a new technology. It was about changing the internal culture of his companies, which, as he had learned, was far more complex and delicate than anything he had done before. The first step was going to be listening. Elon realized that he couldn't simply dictate the change from the top down. He had to hear directly from his employees about what they were going through, what they needed, and what they were missing in their work lives. Over the next few weeks, he decided to host a series of open forums in each of his companies, Tesla, SpaceX, and The Boring Company. He would be there, not as the CEO, but as an employee, someone who was genuinely interested in understanding the pulse of the people who made the wheels of his empire turn. The first forum was held at the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada, and Elon could feel his heart race as he prepared to speak in front of the group. He had visited many factories and offices over the years, but this was different. This time, he wasn't just walking through the halls with a clear mission. He was standing in front of his employees, ready to hear everything they had to say about their struggles, their frustrations, and their hopes. The room was large and filled with employees from all levels of the company, engineers, production line workers, supervisors. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense of skepticism. Elon could tell that not everyone was convinced this meeting would lead to any meaningful change. "Thank you for taking the time to be here," Elon said, his voice steady but tinged with the nervousness he had rarely felt in his career. "I know I'm usually the one who's in charge, telling you what needs to be done. But today, I'm here to listen. I want to hear from all of you. What's working? What's not working? How can we make things better, together?" He paused, scanning the room, waiting for someone to speak. At first, the silence was overwhelming, as if no one quite knew how to respond to such an open invitation. But then, one hand went up. It was Michelle, a longtime assembly line worker with a reputation for being outspoken. She had been with the company for over 5 years, and it was clear that people respected her. Look, Elon, Michelle began, her voice firm but respectful, I've been here for a while now. And I've seen a lot of changes. Some of them have been great, but there are still a lot of things that make this job harder than it needs to be. Elon nodded, encouraging her to continue. It's not just about the long hours or the speed of production, she said. It's the fact that we're constantly working under pressure without really understanding the bigger picture. Sure, we hear about the cars, the goals, the mission to save the planet, but it's not enough. We need to understand how our work fits into that mission. And we need better support when things go wrong. Michelle's words struck a chord with Elon. He had heard similar complaints from others, but hearing it from Michelle, someone who had worked tirelessly for years, felt different. This wasn't just about the technology, it was about purpose, meaning, and recognition. A few other employees spoke up, echoing Michelle's sentiments. They talked about the exhaustion of trying to keep up with the pace, the lack of feedback or appreciation for their hard work, and the uncertainty of their roles. Some felt like they were just cogs in a machine, never given the opportunity to contribute their ideas or have their voices heard. Elon listened carefully, absorbing every word. There was no defensiveness in his responses, no justifications or excuses. He had learned that leadership wasn't about making excuses, it was about taking responsibility and showing up to fix the issues. After the meeting, Elon spent time walking through the factory floor, speaking one-on-one with workers in the production lines, asking them about their day-to-day experiences. He wanted to see the reality for himself, to understand the challenges they faced. The machines hummed and whirred around him, but there was a quietness among the workers, a sense that they were just going through the motions, detached from the larger goals of the company. Later that night, as he sat in his hotel room reflecting on the day's events, Elon's mind raced. He had come face to face with the undeniable truth: his companies had become too focused on speed and efficiency at the expense of their people. They had forgotten that their employees weren't just tools to meet quotas, they were human beings who needed to feel valued, appreciated, and connected to the mission. He knew that the road to cultural transformation wouldn't be easy. It would require a shift in mindset, not just from him, but from everyone in leadership positions. The task ahead was daunting, but it was necessary. It wasn't enough to just push for innovation, he had to make sure that his teams were equipped with the tools, the support, and the environment they needed to thrive. The following week, Elon visited SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The mood there was similar to what he had encountered at Tesla, a mixture of dedication and frustration. The engineers and designers were working around the clock to perfect the next generation of spacecraft, but there was a sense of weariness in the air. The pressure was immense, and it was clear that many of the employees felt as though they were being asked to do the impossible without the necessary resources or recognition. This time, Elon didn't wait for the formal meeting. He walked directly into the engineering department, where a group of engineers were hunched over their workstations, poring over blueprints and models for the upcoming Mars missions. The room fell silent as they noticed him enter, and Elon could sense the tension. "Hey, everyone," he said casually, trying to ease the mood. "I just wanted to drop by and see how things were going." One of the engineers, Sarah, looked up from her screen and gave him a wary smile. "Well, we're definitely pushing the limits of what's possible. But we're also running on fumes, to be honest. Everyone's been working non-stop for weeks now, and it's starting to take its toll." Elon nodded. "I hear you. I've seen that same level of burnout in other departments, and I want you to know that I'm committed to making sure you all have the support you need, not just the resources, but the emotional support too. We need to do better by you." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's about time someone noticed. It's hard to keep working at the pace we're expected to when it feels like we're constantly being asked to sacrifice more and more." Elon's heart sank as he heard her words. This wasn't just about technology, it was about well-being, balance, and care for the people behind the innovation. And he realized that it was a conversation that needed to be had across every level of the company, not just in isolated forums or meetings. It had to be a cultural shift, a change in how leadership approached their employees. As he walked out of the department, Elon was more certain than ever that the time for change was now. The future of his companies depended not only on groundbreaking products but on creating a culture where people could thrive, where they were encouraged to bring their full selves to the work, without the constant fear of burnout or feeling undervalued. The journey ahead was long, but Elon Musk was beginning to understand that change could not come without first confronting the hardest truths. After his visits to Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk's resolve grew stronger. He knew that if his companies were to continue changing the world, they needed to build more than just groundbreaking technologies. They needed to rebuild their foundational culture, one that centered on collaboration, respect, and mutual understanding. It wasn't enough to just make the next big thing, he wanted his teams to thrive as they did it. Elon spent the next few days reflecting on the conversations he had with employees, particularly the feedback from workers who felt disconnected and overwhelmed. He had heard their concerns about the lack of transparency, the endless hours with no real acknowledgement of their efforts, and the pressure of working on projects that sometimes felt like they were never ending. It was clear that he had to do more than just listen, he had to act, and quickly. In the days following, Elon met with his core leadership teams from both Tesla and SpaceX. This was a crucial step. He knew that leadership was key to this shift, and for real change to occur, they needed to be aligned with his vision of a new culture. He couldn't lead this transformation alone, he needed everyone on board. Sitting in the boardroom at SpaceX, the mood was different this time. The executives, usually driven by metrics and production goals, seemed to understand the importance of what Elon was proposing. They weren't just talking about rockets or Mars anymore, they were discussing the people who made those dreams a reality. They were discussing how to make sure that every single person at SpaceX felt seen and heard, and how to ensure that the company's mission was something everyone could get behind, not just because of the work they did, but because they felt they were a part of something bigger. "We've always said that we're working to get humanity to Mars," Elon began, standing at the front of the room. "But we can't do that if we don't take care of the people on Earth first. Our mission, our success, depends on every single person here feeling that they matter. That means we have to listen, we have to communicate, and we have to create an environment where our employees can grow, not just professionally, but personally too." A sense of accountability rippled through the room. The idea of creating a supportive, balanced work environment was something that resonated with many of the leaders, but the task was daunting. How would they balance the demands of innovation with the needs of their people? How could they build a culture where mental health, family life, and personal development were as prioritized as producing the next cutting-edge technology? Elon's answer was simple: transparency. The first step was to open the lines of communication between leadership and employees at every level. From the assembly lines at Tesla to the engineering teams at SpaceX, there had to be an understanding of the why behind everything they did. And that understanding had to be communicated clearly, without corporate jargon or vague promises. "We're going to start a new initiative," Elon continued. "We're calling it Mission Humanity. It's not just about sending rockets to Mars anymore. It's about building a culture where every person feels connected to our mission. We're going to create open channels for feedback, hold more regular town halls, and make sure people feel like they're part of a community here, not just an employee number. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to do it together." The room nodded in agreement. The idea of creating Mission Humanity wasn't just a buzzword, it was an actionable goal that would start small, but could have massive, ripple effects across the entire company. The first step in putting Mission Humanity into motion was to introduce a company-wide initiative for mental health support. Elon had learned from his undercover experiences that many employees were feeling overworked, underappreciated, and mentally drained. Long hours were taking a toll, and burnout was becoming a silent killer within the workforce. He made the decision to implement mental health resources across all departments and offer employees access to counseling services, wellness programs, and flexible work schedules. He was clear about his vision: if his people couldn't function well mentally and emotionally, their capacity to innovate, collaborate, and build the future would be compromised. At the next company-wide meeting at SpaceX, Elon stood before his employees, this time not in a sterile conference room, but in the bustling heart of their headquarters. As he addressed the room, he could feel the collective weight of their expectations. They had heard the rumors, seen the shifts in leadership, and now it was time for him to deliver. "I know that many of you are under a lot of pressure," Elon said, his voice steady. "And I know that it's easy to think that the mission, the dream, is all that matters. But we can't reach Mars, we can't make life multiplanetary, if we don't first take care of the people who are helping to get us there. That starts with making sure you are healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally." The room was silent. No one expected this. Elon had always been about pushing the limits of possibility. But this was a softer side of leadership, one that was much more personal and vulnerable. "We're introducing new mental health resources," Elon continued. "And we're offering all of you access to counseling services, wellness programs, and the ability to work in a way that works for you. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. If you're not in a good place, if you're not supported, then you can't give your best to this company. And I need your best." There was a murmur in the crowd. Employees looked at each other, some skeptical, others cautiously hopeful. For years, they had been used to the culture of constant pressure. This was new territory for them. "We'll also be hosting regular town halls," Elon added, "where you can speak openly with me and the leadership team about what's working, what's not, and how we can improve. I want you to feel heard. I want you to know that your voices matter." The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Elon could see some of the tension start to melt away as employees began to process what he was saying. The idea of open dialogue and personal well-being suddenly felt like a tangible change, not just an abstract concept. That afternoon, Elon sent out a company-wide email reiterating what he had said in the meeting. He wanted every employee at SpaceX to understand that the new direction was not just about innovation and space exploration, it was about the people who would bring those innovations to life. As he clicked "send" on the email, Elon felt a quiet sense of relief. He knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would take time to see real results. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction, not just for his companies, but for himself as a leader. The introduction of the Mission Humanity initiative was just the beginning. For Elon Musk, one of the hardest challenges was not in crafting the plan or getting buy-in from his leadership teams. It was in making sure that the initiative would trickle down through every level of his companies and truly reshape the culture, a culture that had been dominated by long hours, constant deadlines, and a relentless pursuit of perfection. In the following weeks, Elon made it clear that the success of this transformation didn't just rest on policies or new resources, it was about changing the mindset of every single employee, from the executives to the assembly line workers. This shift needed to happen on a personal level, not just a corporate one. He wanted people to truly internalize the idea that they were more than just cogs in a machine, they were integral parts of a larger vision. Elon had always been someone who could push forward quickly, but this time, he knew that it was important to show patience. He couldn't expect instant results, this was going to be a gradual, organic process. But he had made a promise to his employees, and he was determined to keep it. The first major test of the initiative came at the Tesla Gigafactory, where Michelle, the assembly line worker who had spoken so candidly at the first open forum, was already seeing small but significant changes. For Michelle, the changes were more than just new wellness programs or mental health resources, they were about how the leadership approached the day-to-day operations. Elon had made it clear that he wasn't just interested in the big picture, he wanted to understand the small, often overlooked details that made the lives of his employees harder. Michelle had noticed that her supervisor, Greg, seemed more approachable than ever before. He wasn't just barking orders or giving orders with little explanation, he was talking to the workers, listening to their concerns, and offering feedback. One afternoon, when Michelle brought up a concern about the production line, Greg didn't brush it off as something trivial. Instead, he took the time to hear her out, thanked her for her input, and made a few changes to streamline the process. Michelle wasn't used to this kind of leadership, and it felt refreshing. Her peers had noticed the change too. There was a palpable sense of hope in the factory floor that hadn't been there before. The constant hum of machines felt a little less oppressive, and even the usual complaints about the long hours seemed to have less bite. Workers were still putting in the effort, but now they felt like they were being supported in ways that made them want to work even harder. Maybe this mission humanity thing is more than just a slogan after all, Michelle thought to herself one day as she tightened bolts on the production line. Maybe it's real this time. At SpaceX, the changes were equally noticeable, though the challenges were different. The work here was more conceptual, more about pushing the limits of what humanity could achieve. Engineers like Sarah had been used to working in isolation, focusing on their projects without much interaction with other departments or management. But now, as part of the Mission Humanity initiative, regular check-ins were becoming the norm. These weren't just status update meetings, they were opportunities for employees to talk about their challenges, their frustrations, and their ideas for making the work environment better. Sarah had been skeptical at first, assuming these check-ins would be just another corporate initiative with no real impact. But the more she participated, the more she realized that Elon and the leadership team were genuinely committed to improving their experience. During one of the first meetings, Sarah shared a concern about the long hours and the emotional toll the work was taking on the team. To her surprise, the leadership team didn't just acknowledge her concern, they acted on it, reducing the mandatory overtime and offering mental health resources that they could access anytime. For Sarah, this was a game changer. It felt like for the first time, SpaceX wasn't just interested in getting the rockets to launch, it cared about the people who were making those launches possible. It wasn't about sacrificing human well-being for the sake of progress anymore. It was about a balance between pushing the boundaries of space exploration and ensuring that the people involved were supported every step of the way. Elon had known that the real test of the Mission Humanity initiative would come when the results started to show up in the form of tangible outcomes. If employees were more satisfied, more connected to the company's mission, would productivity increase? Would they continue to innovate at the pace they had before? The first real sign that things were moving in the right direction came when Tesla hit a major milestone in production. The Gigafactory had just finished ramping up the production of the new Model Y, and the numbers were exceeding expectations. But what caught Elon's attention wasn't just the speed of production, it was the positive feedback he was hearing from the factory workers themselves. In an interview with the local news outlet, one of the assembly line workers, Jake, commented on the new culture at Tesla. "We've always been proud of the cars we make, but now it feels like we're part of something bigger. It's not just about getting the cars out the door, it's about being a part of the mission to change the world. And that makes a difference." Elon couldn't help but smile as he watched the interview. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the confirmation that the new culture was starting to take root, not just in the leadership team, but with the workers who were on the ground every day. Back at SpaceX, similar changes were happening. The engineering team had just completed the final prototype for the new Starship, and the results were impressive. The feedback from employees about the working environment was positive, with many noting that the team was more collaborative than ever before. The atmosphere at SpaceX had shifted from one of isolated individual efforts to a more cohesive, team-oriented environment. During a team meeting to discuss the next steps for Starship, one of the lead engineers, Roberto, spoke up. "You know, I've been with SpaceX for over 5 years, and I've never seen the team work this well together. The support we've gotten from leadership, not just in terms of resources, but in listening to our ideas, has made a huge difference. I feel like we're finally all pulling in the same direction." Elon knew that this wasn't just about rocket launches or cars, it was about creating an environment where everyone felt like they were part of the mission. When the team was aligned, when they felt respected and supported, there was no limit to what they could achieve. As the months went by, Elon continued to be deeply involved in the process of change. He was still visiting the factories and headquarters regularly, talking to employees at every level, gathering feedback, and making adjustments where needed. There were setbacks, of course, change was never linear. But the momentum was undeniable. The more people felt heard, supported, and valued, the more they gave back in return. It wasn't just about turning a profit or achieving technological milestones anymore. It was about creating a culture where innovation could thrive, but so could the people behind it. As the weeks turned into months, the changes in both Tesla and SpaceX were becoming increasingly visible. The foundation of the Mission Humanity initiative was starting to stabilize, with many employees more engaged, productive, and satisfied with the direction their companies were heading. Elon Musk, for the first time in years, felt a sense of cautious optimism. But, as with any major shift, there were still significant obstacles to overcome. The more Elon observed, the more he realized that the transition wasn't as smooth as he had hoped. While most employees embraced the changes, some were still resistant, particularly those who had been part of the older, more demanding culture. A few of the executives he trusted most seemed disillusioned by the new emphasis on work-life balance and mental health initiatives. To them, it felt like a distraction from what they perceived as the true purpose: relentless innovation and expansion. One of those executives, Jake Richardson, the head of Tesla's manufacturing division, had voiced concerns more than once in private meetings. Jake had been with Tesla for nearly 10 years, and he had built a reputation for pushing the factory floor to its limits. His approach had worked in the past. Tesla had always been known for its speed and intensity, producing cars faster than most of its competitors. But now, with the new emphasis on employee well-being and slower, more methodical production, Jake found himself questioning Elon's vision. "You're not the same, Elon," Jake said during one of their more tense meetings. "I get that you want to focus on people, but this is a business. People can't come before the product. We're in a race against the clock, and every minute we waste on soft initiatives is a minute that our competitors are using to take the lead." Elon sat back in his chair, carefully considering his words. This conversation wasn't the first of its kind. He had heard similar complaints from other senior leaders at both Tesla and SpaceX. The heart of the matter wasn't just the shift in culture, it was a fear that slowing down, focusing on employees, and creating a more compassionate workplace would come at the expense of the mission. "I understand your concerns, Jake," Elon replied, his tone calm but firm. "But the mission is nothing without the people who drive it. If we burn out our teams and create a culture of fear and exhaustion, then what's the point of all this? Innovation doesn't thrive on pressure alone. It thrives when people feel valued and supported." Jake's face hardened. "I'm not saying we throw away the hard work and the grit. I'm saying we can't afford to get soft. We've got one shot at making this work." Elon's eyes narrowed, sensing that Jake wasn't just disagreeing with the new initiative, he was rejecting it entirely. But Elon knew better than to back down from a fight like this. He wasn't trying to soften his companies, he was trying to make them stronger by building a foundation that wouldn't collapse under pressure. "Jake," Elon said quietly, "I'm not asking anyone to abandon the work ethic we've always had. But I'm asking everyone to realize that we're building a future, not just for the company, but for humanity. And that future requires more than just speed, it requires resilience. If we don't take care of the people who make it happen, we won't have the strength to go the distance." Jake fell silent, his jaw clenched. Elon could tell that, while he hadn't won Jake over, he had at least planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Elon knew that this would be a long battle, but he wasn't backing down. The future of Tesla, SpaceX, and, ultimately, the future of humanity depended on getting this right. The tension with Jake wasn't the only sign that Mission Humanity was facing opposition. Even as Elon saw the positive effects of the initiative across the workforce, he realized that the resistance wasn't just coming from the top down, it was also coming from the bottom up. Some employees, particularly those who had been with the company for a long time, felt a sense of disconnection from the changes. At Tesla, a long-time engineer named Mark had been with the company for nearly a decade. He had seen the company evolve from a small startup into the global powerhouse it was today. But with all the changes in culture, he wasn't sure where he fit anymore. "There's a lot of talk about supporting the team and mental health," Mark said to his colleague, Elena, during a lunch break. But what about the product? What about the tech? We're slowing down. The world is watching. And I don't know if I can keep up with all this soft stuff. Elena, who had joined Tesla much more recently, looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern. Mark, don't you think the product depends on the people who make it? We can't just burn ourselves out and expect greatness. I get what you're saying, but I think this is a long-term investment. We're not just talking about cars, we're talking about making a company that's built to last. Mark wasn't so sure. He wasn't opposed to the idea of caring for the team, but he wasn't sure that slowing down was the right way to get to the next level of innovation. As these conversations unfolded in private corners of Tesla and SpaceX, Elon began to feel the weight of the challenge he had undertaken. The changes he had implemented were already starting to reshape the work culture, but at the same time, they were exposing deep divides within the companies. People were torn between wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves and wanting to get back to the hard-charging, high-pressure world they knew. Elon had hoped that Mission Humanity would be the solution to the burnout and exhaustion he had seen in his companies. But now, he was beginning to realize that the journey ahead wouldn't be as easy as he had hoped. He wasn't just battling against external competitors, he was also battling the deep-seated values of his own teams, many of whom had grown up with the mindset of relentless pursuit, no matter the cost. And as the months passed, the cracks in the new culture began to show. Elon stood at the window of his office, staring out at the massive SpaceX campus, his mind racing. The vision he had worked so hard to cultivate, one of a balanced, supportive workplace, was starting to fray at the edges. Despite his best efforts, there were factions within his teams who still prioritized speed over sustainability, pressure over well-being. As much as he wanted to push forward, to make the world-changing innovations happen faster, he knew he had to find a way to bridge this divide. He couldn't afford to lose the trust of his people, nor could he afford to let the cracks in the foundation spread further. The cracks were becoming more noticeable now, and Elon felt the weight of the growing tension in the air. For the first time since he launched both Tesla and SpaceX, the companies he had built from the ground up were at a crossroads. The old ways, the relentless pursuit of innovation at the expense of everything else, were clashing with the new vision of a more human-centered, sustainable approach. Elon had promised his employees a better future, a future where they didn't have to choose between their personal well-being and their passion for making a difference. But as the resistance continued to mount, he couldn't help but wonder if he had underestimated just how deeply ingrained the old culture was. It wasn't just the executives anymore. The employees, many of whom had been with the company for years, were starting to question whether the new initiatives were truly in the best interest of the company, or whether they were an unnecessary distraction from the ultimate goal, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The tipping point came on a crisp Tuesday morning, when Elon received a call from Gwen, the chief operating officer at Tesla. Her voice was tight, and Elon immediately knew something was wrong. "Elon, we need to talk. There's something going on with the team that you need to know about." Elon's mind raced. "What's happening, Gwen?" "I'm hearing from people on the floor that they're feeling torn," Gwen said, her voice strained. "A lot of the leadership team is still pushing for the old way of doing things. They're pushing hard for production targets, and the Mission Humanity message is getting lost in the noise. People are frustrated. They don't know which way to go." Elon sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had known that this moment was coming, but hearing it directly from Gwen made it all the more real. The initiatives he had worked so hard to implement were in danger of being swallowed by the machine he had spent years building. "Do you think it's too late?" Elon asked quietly. Gwen paused before answering. "No, I don't think it's too late. But we need to act quickly. If we don't address this, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Later that day, Elon called an emergency meeting with the leadership teams of both Tesla and SpaceX. The room was filled with the usual suspects, executives and senior managers who had been with him through thick and thin. They were his most trusted allies, but even they had begun to show signs of impatience. The atmosphere was tense as Elon addressed them. "I've been hearing a lot of concerns lately about the direction we're taking," Elon began. "And I want to be clear, this isn't a side project. This is a core part of what we're doing here. If we don't start living and breathing Mission Humanity, we're going to lose everything that made this company special." He glanced around the room, noticing the looks of uncertainty on several faces. He could see it in their eyes, many were still skeptical. Still, he pressed on. "I understand the pressure to meet targets, to get things done quickly. I feel that pressure, too. But we're not going to make it to the next level by pushing our teams until they burn out. If we keep going the way we are, we'll be left with a company of tired, demoralized people, and that's not what I want for Tesla or SpaceX." The room remained silent, and Elon could feel the weight of his words settling in. He had spent years building his companies on the belief that they could change the world. But now, he had to convince those around him that they could only do that if they treated their people like human beings, not machines. Gwen spoke up. "Elon's right. We've been losing sight of why we started this in the first place. We're not just building rockets and cars. We're building a future. And to build that future, we need people who are healthy, inspired, and committed. We can't burn them out in the process." Elon could see that Gwen's words were resonating with some of the executives in the room. But there were still a few holdouts, people like Jake Richardson, who had been in the trenches for years and didn't want to hear about slowing down or soft initiatives. Jake crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "I hear what you're saying," Jake said slowly. "But the reality is, we're in a race. Our competitors are moving fast, and if we take our foot off the gas, we're going to fall behind. We can't afford to be too human while we're trying to build the future of humanity." Elon locked eyes with him, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Jake's words hit hard, but Elon had come to realize that this battle wasn't just about changing policy, it was about changing minds. And changing minds meant having difficult conversations. "We're not slowing down, Jake," Elon said, his voice steady but firm. "We're accelerating. But we're doing it in a way that supports our teams. This isn't about being too human. It's about ensuring that we have the people and the culture that will get us there in the long run. The way we're doing things now, it's unsustainable. We need to find a new path." Jake looked around the room, clearly processing the weight of Elon's words. He opened his mouth as though to say something more, but then closed it, his expression unreadable. It was clear to Elon that this conversation was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could still turn this around. Maybe they could still make it work. In the days that followed, Elon spent more time than ever visiting the factories and meeting with employees at every level. He didn't want just to hear from his senior leadership, he wanted to hear from the people who were truly living the day-to-day experience of working at Tesla and SpaceX. It was crucial that he understood the pulse of the organization from the ground up. Michelle, the assembly line worker from Tesla, was one of the first people he spoke with. He found her during one of his unannounced visits to the Gigafactory. She was working in her usual spot, assembling parts with focused precision, when she noticed Elon standing nearby. "Elon, didn't expect to see you here," she said, a warm but slightly apprehensive smile spreading across her face. Elon smiled back, though he could tell that the energy in the room had shifted. It was clear that people were watching, waiting to see what he would say. "How's everything going, Michelle?" Elon asked, genuinely curious. She paused, wiping her brow with the back of her hand before answering. "It's been, okay. The changes are still new, and some people are still getting used to it. But I can tell that there's something different in the air. People are talking about it more. There's a sense of hope, even if it's small." Elon nodded, taking in her words. This was the feedback he needed, the honest, unfiltered truth. "I know it's not perfect," he said quietly, "but we're working on it. We're trying to make things better, for everyone. And that means making sure people feel supported, not just pushed. Michelle's face softened, and for the first time in a while, Elon felt a sense of reassurance. Maybe, just maybe, the change he was fighting for was starting to take root. The tipping point had passed, and now it was time for the real work to begin. Elon knew that he had to continue making tough decisions, but he also knew that the road ahead was worth it. He wasn't just changing the way Tesla and SpaceX operated, he was building a future where people and innovation could coexist, where success wasn't measured only by speed and results, but by the strength and well-being of the people who made it all possible. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? After the tense meeting with the leadership team, Elon spent the next few days in a daze. The weight of the challenge ahead was heavier than he had expected. While some of his senior executives had begun to understand the need for change, many were still resistant. They saw it as an obstacle to the ultimate goal, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But Elon knew the path forward was clear. The question was, how could he bridge the divide between these competing priorities? For the first time in a long while, Elon took a step back from the whirlwind of meetings, emails, and factory visits. He needed to clear his mind and refocus. The mental clarity he sought was elusive, but he knew that if he didn't find it soon, the changes he had worked so hard for might slip through his fingers. It was a Saturday morning when Elon made the decision to spend the day at the SpaceX headquarters. It was unusually quiet, as most employees were off for the weekend, but the stillness was exactly what he needed. He walked through the open, sunlit hallways of the SpaceX facility, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. As he walked through the building, he found himself thinking back to the early days of Tesla and SpaceX. The sleepless nights, the long hours, the relentless drive to make the impossible happen. He had pushed himself and his teams harder than he ever thought possible, and together, they had built something extraordinary. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of something important, the people who made it all possible. He paused in front of a window that overlooked the launch pads where SpaceX's rocket sat, poised for the next mission. He watched as a few engineers walked across the tarmac, exchanging quiet words and smiles. It was a rare moment of peace for Elon, but it also reminded him of the bigger picture. All the ambition, all the success, meant nothing if he didn't have a team of passionate, engaged individuals working alongside him. He couldn't afford to lose that passion, especially now, when the mission was so critical. Later that afternoon, Elon found himself in a small, nondescript room at the back of the building. The room was a far cry from the sleek, high-tech offices of the executives he usually interacted with. This room, with its worn chairs and faded paint, was where the engineers and technicians spent their breaks, simple, humble, and stripped of any pretense. It was here that Elon had the chance to speak with a group of employees who had been with SpaceX from the beginning. Among them was Sarah, a lead technician who had been instrumental in many of SpaceX's early launches. She had seen it all, the highs, the lows, the frustrations. And despite the constant pressure, Sarah had never wavered in her belief that the mission was worth it. Elon had always admired her unwavering commitment. "So, how are things really going?" Elon asked as he took a seat beside Sarah. She didn't hesitate. "It's been tough, Elon. A lot of us are still trying to figure out how we fit into the new vision. There's this sense that we're supposed to change overnight, but the old ways are hard to shake off. And I think some people are scared. They don't know if they can keep up." Elon nodded. "I get it. But what I'm hearing is that people want to be part of the mission. They just want to know that we're not going to burn them out in the process." Sarah's eyes softened. "Exactly. No one here is afraid of hard work. We've all signed up for that. But what we're asking for is a little balance. We don't want to be left behind when the company evolves." Elon leaned forward, feeling the weight of her words. It was exactly what he had been struggling with. He had always been so focused on moving fast, on achieving greatness, that he had failed to see the toll it was taking on the people around him. Now, he realized that he needed to strike a balance, not just between innovation and well-being, but between the mission and the people who would carry it forward. "I've been hearing that a lot," Elon said quietly. "And it's something I haven't taken seriously enough. We've been pushing so hard, and I haven't stopped to think about how that's affecting everyone. I'm sorry for that. I'm committed to changing the way we work, but it's going to take time. And I need your help to make it happen." Sarah smiled, a slight flicker of hope in her eyes. "We're with you, Elon. We just need to know that you're with us, too." That evening, Elon took a long walk around the SpaceX grounds, his thoughts swirling. The clarity he had been searching for finally came to him. Mission Humanity wasn't just a slogan. It was the heart of everything Tesla and SpaceX had ever stood for. It wasn't enough to simply innovate, it was about creating a sustainable future where people could thrive while building that future. He could see it now, a future where his companies weren't just known for their technology but for how they treated the people who created that technology. His leadership wasn't just about pushing boundaries, it was about empowering the individuals who would push those boundaries with him. Elon was beginning to understand that the two weren't mutually exclusive. He sat down at a bench under the stars, taking in the peaceful silence of the night. In that moment, it felt like everything had come full circle. His work wasn't just about rockets, cars, or even Mars. It was about building a better world, a world where people were supported, where creativity could thrive, and where a sense of purpose drove everything they did. Elon knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be pushback, more difficult conversations, and setbacks along the way. But for the first time in months, he felt a sense of certainty. The mission was clear. It was time to lead not just with vision, but with compassion. The future he had always dreamed of was within reach, but only if he could build it in a way that honored the people who would help make it happen. The next morning, Elon scheduled a company-wide meeting for both Tesla and SpaceX. It was time to make things right. He had thought long and hard about what he wanted to say, and he knew that this meeting would set the tone for the future. As he stood before the team, his voice steady but filled with conviction, Elon spoke from the heart. "I've heard your concerns, and I've felt the tension. But I want you all to know this, our success doesn't just depend on what we build, it depends on how we build it, and who we build it with. We are here to change the world, but we're also here to make sure we don't leave anyone behind in the process. I promise you, we will change how we work, how we treat each other, and how we make the future together." There was a long pause in the room, as employees exchanged glances. But then, slowly, applause began to fill the room, and Elon allowed himself a small smile. He could feel the energy shift. It wasn't a complete victory yet, but it was a start. The days following the company-wide meeting were filled with palpable energy and cautious optimism. The tension that had hung over Tesla and SpaceX for so long seemed to dissipate, at least for the moment. The shift in leadership tone was subtle, but it was there. Elon had started to see it in the eyes of his employees, some were still skeptical, but others were genuinely hopeful. It was the kind of hope that could drive a company to change. Elon didn't expect miracles overnight, but he was determined to make the necessary adjustments. He knew that action spoke louder than words, and the next few weeks would be crucial in proving that his commitment to Mission Humanity was more than just a slogan. It was time to put the plans into action. A week later, he found himself back at the Tesla Gigafactory in Fremont, California. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the factory, casting long shadows across the assembly lines. The hum of machinery and the chatter of workers filled the air. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. There was a quieter sense of purpose. People seemed to be moving with more intention, and the usual hustle had a renewed sense of rhythm. Elon had scheduled a series of town hall meetings across various departments. These were not the usual corporate meetings where executives addressed the staff with prepared speeches and PowerPoint presentations. This time, Elon was sitting down with his people. No intermediaries, no barriers. Just him and the team that had been building the future for over a decade. As he walked into the first town hall session, he was greeted by familiar faces. Michelle, the lead assembly technician from his previous visit, stood near the front, her arms folded, her expression thoughtful. He nodded at her as he made his way to the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone," Elon began, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "I know we've had some tough conversations lately, but I want to hear directly from you. How are we doing? What's working, and what still needs to change?" There was a collective pause. It was clear that no one had expected this kind of open-ended question from Elon. Most of the employees were used to hearing him talk about vision, production, and innovation, but today, it was different. Today, he was asking for feedback in a way that felt more personal. Michelle raised her hand, and Elon gestured for her to speak. "Elon, it's been a lot better recently," she said. "I've noticed a difference in the energy here. People feel like they have more of a voice now. It's still a work in progress, but the culture shift you're talking about, it's starting to happen." Elon smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "I'm glad to hear that. But I want to make sure this isn't just a temporary shift. It's not enough for us to feel good for a few weeks, we need to create lasting change." Another voice called out from the back of the room. "But it's hard. You know that, right? We're all under pressure to meet deadlines, to hit targets. And sometimes it feels like we're being pulled in two directions." Elon turned toward the voice, a young engineer who had been working on one of Tesla's latest battery projects. "I understand," he said, nodding. "The pressure isn't going away. But what I'm asking for is that we find a way to work smarter, not harder. That means creating a work environment where we're supporting each other, not pushing each other to the breaking point." The engineer's face softened. "I get that. It just feels like there's always something else to do, you know." Elon paused. "I know exactly what you mean. And it's something I've struggled with myself, constantly feeling like there's more to do, more to accomplish. But the truth is, we can't do it all at once. We have to prioritize, and we have to take care of each other along the way." As the meeting continued, Elon listened intently to the concerns and feedback from his employees. The conversation shifted from individual frustrations to group suggestions. Employees began to offer solutions, ideas for improving the workflow, ways to streamline processes without sacrificing quality. They spoke about their personal experiences, the late nights, the burnout, and the times when they felt overlooked or undervalued. It was a raw, honest conversation, and Elon could sense the shift in the room. He was no longer the distant CEO delivering directives from on high. He was part of the team, someone who was willing to listen, to change, and to evolve. That afternoon, as Elon made his way through the factory, he took note of the small changes that were happening. There was a new sense of camaraderie among the workers, an unspoken understanding that they were all in this together. The atmosphere was still intense, but it felt more like a shared mission than a race against time. At the end of the day, Elon sat down with Gwen, Tesla's chief operating officer, in her office. He had spent most of the day on the floor, hearing from employees and observing firsthand the effects of the changes. But now, it was time to evaluate the next steps. "Elon," Gwen began, "I've been seeing the same thing. There's a noticeable shift. People are more engaged. But we still have a long way to go. Some teams are fully on board, but there's still resistance in others. We need to create more channels for communication and make sure we're providing the resources people need." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "Agreed. I've been thinking about how we can integrate more feedback loops, real-time feedback from the people on the ground. And we need to show them that we're not just talking about change. We're implementing it." Gwen looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You're talking about a full cultural overhaul, aren't you?" Elon didn't hesitate. "Yes, but it's not just about culture. It's about sustainability. For the company to last, for us to truly make the impact we want to make on the world, we have to take care of the people who are making it happen. If we don't do that, all the innovation in the world won't matter. There was a moment of silence as Gwen absorbed his words. Finally, she spoke. Then let's make it happen. We'll put together a roadmap for the next 6 months, clear milestones, clear goals. We'll track progress and adjust as needed. But we need to make this real, not just talk about it. Elon smiled. That's exactly what I had in mind. The ripple effect of Elon's decision to embrace a more human-centered leadership style began to spread. What started as small conversations in town halls and factory floors soon grew into larger initiatives. Employees felt empowered, and they began to take ownership of the changes. There were hiccups, of course. Resistance never disappeared entirely, and some of the old pressures still lingered. But the foundation for a more sustainable, compassionate culture had been laid. Elon knew this was just the beginning. The challenges ahead were many, and the road to full cultural transformation was long. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the momentum shift. This wasn't just about building rockets or cars. It was about building something even more important, a company that could truly make a difference in the world, with people who were not just working for a paycheck, but working toward a shared vision of a better future. And that was a future worth fighting for. The weeks after the town hall meetings were transformative, but they weren't without their challenges. While many employees were embracing the changes Elon had set in motion, others were more hesitant. Old habits die hard, and the culture of constant pressure and relentless innovation didn't just vanish overnight. Elon knew that he had made the first step toward a better future, but now, the real work began, making sure the momentum didn't falter. Tesla and SpaceX were still in the midst of rapid expansion, pushing for breakthroughs in sustainable energy, electric vehicles, and space exploration. And despite the culture shift, the projects didn't stop. Elon found himself walking a fine line between continuing to innovate while ensuring his teams weren't burning out. One afternoon, Elon found himself sitting in his office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, reviewing a series of reports on production and new initiatives. His mind kept wandering, distracted by the feeling that something was still missing. Yes, morale had improved somewhat, and yes, the conversations with employees were helping, but were they enough? He thought about the conversation he had with Gwen a few days ago, where they had discussed the next phase of their cultural shift. She had suggested a new way to measure success, not just through numbers and milestones but through the health and engagement of their teams. It was a revolutionary idea, but one that Elon found himself coming back to over and over. Later that week, Elon attended a high-level meeting at the SpaceX headquarters. His mind wasn't entirely focused on the numbers being discussed but instead on the employees in the room, the engineers, designers, and rocket specialists who had poured their hearts and souls into the company. As he looked around, he realized that they had been through so much together. The early days of SpaceX were filled with failure and disappointment, but there was something undeniable about the resolve of these individuals. They were more than just colleagues, they were a family bound by the shared belief that humanity's future lay beyond Earth. Yet, the same pressures that had driven them to success were now threatening to break them down. The long hours, the last-minute deadlines, the endless push for perfection, it was all starting to wear on people. And Elon realized that this was where the true test of leadership would come. He wasn't just building rockets or electric cars, he was building a future for the people who would shape it. That evening, after the meeting, Elon took a walk through the SpaceX facility. The place was quieter now, with most of the staff gone for the day. He walked past the towering rockets, the pieces of machinery that were once so foreign to him, and thought back to the first time he had set foot in this very place. He had been an outsider, driven by a single mission, to prove that private companies could go to space and change the world. But as the years had passed, his vision had expanded. It wasn't just about Mars anymore, or sending humans into space. It was about creating something bigger, something that would outlast him, outlast all of them. It was about ensuring that, no matter what, the people who helped build that future would have a place in it, too. The next morning, Elon called Gwen into his office. He could sense the urgency in the air. His decision was made, and he was ready to act. "I've been thinking," Elon began, pacing slightly as he spoke. "We've been measuring success the wrong way. It's not just about the number of launches, the vehicles on the road, or the revenue. It's about the people who make it all happen. Their health, their well-being, their engagement. If we don't get that right, then nothing else will matter." Gwen listened intently, her eyes focused. "You're talking about a major shift in how we approach performance metrics." Gwen considered his words carefully. "It's a bold move, Elon. But I agree. If we're serious about the long-term success of SpaceX and Tesla, this is the next step." Elon nodded. "I'm going to start with a pilot program. We'll track engagement and well-being in a small group, test the new system, and see how it affects the larger company. If it works, we'll roll it out across the board." As the weeks passed, the changes began to take root. Employees, from the engineers in the field to the designers in the offices, were becoming more engaged. Feedback loops were established, and people were beginning to see that their concerns weren't just being heard, they were being acted upon. Teams that had been siloed before were now collaborating more openly. Elon made a point of continuing his walkthroughs, sitting down with employees in their workspaces, having casual conversations about what was working and what wasn't. The feedback was invaluable, and he kept reminding himself to take these lessons into every decision he made. However, not everyone was on board with the new direction. There were still pockets of resistance, particularly among those who had been at the company from the beginning. They viewed the new focus on well-being as a distraction, a slowing down of the pace that had once made Tesla and SpaceX the trailblazers they were. One day, as Elon was meeting with a senior executive at SpaceX, the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Elon," the executive said, "I've been thinking about this whole well-being focus. I get it, but we can't let it take our foot off the gas. We're still in a race. The competition is fierce, and if we start worrying too much about how our employees feel, we'll lose sight of what really matters, delivering on our promises and pushing the boundaries of what's possible." Elon took a deep breath. He had heard this argument before. The race, the competition, the endless pursuit of perfection. He understood the sentiment. But he also knew that the future of his companies, and of humanity's future, depended on finding the right balance. "We're not sacrificing ambition," Elon replied calmly. "We're rethinking what success looks like. If we want to change the world, we need to make sure we don't burn out the people who are doing the changing. That's non-negotiable." There was a long silence, but Elon could see that the executive was processing his words. He knew that change wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared for the pushback. He had faced much worse before. As Elon walked away from the meeting, he knew he was at a crossroads. The decision to focus on well-being wasn't just a tactical one, it was a philosophical shift. It was about acknowledging that the human element was just as critical to success as the technology. As he looked out at the rocket launches in the distance, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission hadn't changed. What had changed was his approach to how it would be accomplished. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would only grow. But Elon had never shied away from challenges before. Now, he was more determined than ever to make sure that the future he was building was one where everyone had a chance to thrive, employees and humanity alike. The ripple of change Elon Musk had started to cultivate in his companies was beginning to gain momentum, but with that momentum came an undeniable pressure. Every decision Elon made now seemed amplified, scrutinized by both his employees and the public. The stakes were higher than ever. Tesla and SpaceX weren't just businesses anymore, they were symbols of a future he had promised, a future where the human spirit and technological innovation went hand in hand. Yet, the challenge remained: could a vision of innovation and humanity coexist in a high-stakes, high-speed environment? Elon was about to find out. One Monday morning, after an unusually quiet weekend, Elon received a call from Jim, the head of SpaceX's rocket development division. "Elon, we've hit a problem. The latest iteration of the Falcon 9 booster, it's showing some unexpected instability during testing. We're going to need to delay the next launch by at least 6 months if we can't figure this out. Elon's pulse quickened. Delays were the last thing he wanted. SpaceX had already experienced setbacks before, failed launches, near disasters, and setbacks that had pushed the company to the brink. A 6-month delay would damage the public perception of the company, and worse, it could affect future contracts. He could already hear the criticism from competitors and the media. But instead of reacting immediately, Elon paused. He had made a commitment to foster a more sustainable work environment, and he knew the pressure on the team was immense. Delays were inevitable in the world of space exploration, but how the team handled them, how they worked together, would define everything. "Jim," Elon said after a long pause, "we need to be careful here. I'm not just concerned about the booster. I'm concerned about the team that's been working around the clock on this. Are they okay? I need you to check in with the team and make sure they've got the support they need." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Jim replied. "You really want me to prioritize that over solving the tech issue?" Elon sighed. He could understand the skepticism. "Yes. The technology will get fixed, Jim. It always does. But we need our people to be well enough to solve the problem. If they're burnt out, it won't matter how much time we throw at it." That afternoon, Elon scheduled a video call with the core team of engineers working on the Falcon 9 booster. He knew they were under immense pressure, and he needed to gauge whether the team was struggling with burnout, as he suspected. He wanted to make sure the shift in company culture was making a real impact, not just on paper, but in practice. The call began, and Elon immediately noticed the tension in the faces of the engineers on the screen. There were bags under their eyes, and some of them fidgeted nervously, unable to meet his gaze. Elon, one of the lead engineers, Alan, spoke up first, his voice thick with fatigue. "We've been working non-stop on this for months. Some of us are starting to feel it. There's pressure to get this right, but we're not going to get it right if we're running on empty." Elon's heart sank. He had expected as much, but hearing it out loud felt different. "I understand, Alan. I need you all to know that your well-being matters to me more than the deadlines. We're not going to solve anything if we don't take care of ourselves. I want you to take a step back, get some rest, and come back with fresh eyes." Alan looked taken aback. "But the launch date is already pushed back. If we don't hit the next one, we're risking contracts. People are counting on us." "I know," Elon said gently. "But you can't pour from an empty cup. And I'd rather push back the launch again than risk burning you all out. Take a break, recharge, and then we'll tackle this together with a clear head." There was a long pause before Alan nodded, his shoulders dropping slightly as if a weight had been lifted. "Okay. I'll talk to the others. We'll take some time." As the call ended, Elon sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of both relief and concern. He knew this approach was risky. In the high-pressure world of rocket science, taking time off to rest wasn't always an option. But he believed it was necessary, both for the people and the company. A few days later, Elon visited the SpaceX facilities to check in on the team. As he walked through the lab, he noticed the difference. The engineers, while still focused on their work, seemed more relaxed. The nervous energy that had once permeated the air was gone. People were laughing together, exchanging ideas, and working collaboratively instead of frantically. It was a stark contrast to the intense, almost frantic atmosphere he had witnessed in previous visits. Elon made his way to the conference room where the Falcon 9 booster team was gathered. Alan, along with the rest of the engineers, was there, looking more refreshed. They greeted him with smiles, and Elon noticed a change in their energy. "So, how are we doing?" Elon asked, leaning against the table. "We're making progress," Alan replied. "The teams had a bit of a breather, and we're tackling the problem with a different perspective. It's not a quick fix, but we're on track now. We've figured out some of the issues, and I think we're close to a solution." Elon felt a wave of pride. This was exactly the outcome he had hoped for. By giving his team the space to recover, he had not only prevented burnout but also helped them reconnect with the problem in a more creative, collaborative way. The pressure was still there, but it was now coupled with a sense of renewed purpose. As he left the meeting, Elon felt an overwhelming sense of validation. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to change the world, without sacrificing the well-being of those who were building that future. The next few weeks were filled with progress. The Falcon 9 booster issue was resolved faster than anyone expected. With the new team dynamics in place, SpaceX was back on track for a successful launch. The engineers had regained their momentum, and the entire team had rallied around their collective goal. The delays had only been a temporary setback, but the recovery had brought something even more valuable, a sense of unity. The successful resolution of the issue marked a milestone not only for SpaceX's technology but also for Elon's leadership philosophy. It was a pivotal moment that solidified his belief in the human-centered approach to leadership. It was proof that, sometimes, slowing down was the only way to speed up. As the days passed, Elon reflected on how much had changed. The demands of the job hadn't disappeared, but his perspective had shifted. The race to Mars, to sustainable energy, to electric cars, those were still urgent missions. But now, he was more convinced than ever that the true key to success was not in the speed with which they moved, but in the resilience of the people who were doing the work. And with that resilience, Elon knew they could reach heights beyond even what he had imagined. With the Falcon 9 booster issue behind them, the SpaceX team was back on track, and Elon was feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The shift in culture wasn't just a theory anymore, it had proven itself in action. But as he walked through the SpaceX hangars one crisp morning, something still nagged at him. Yes, the technical issues had been resolved, and the team's morale was higher than ever, but there was something deeper to address. A part of Elon's leadership style had always been about pushing limits, defying what others thought was possible. But after the successes of the recent months, he began to wonder if that relentless drive had masked the true depth of his mission. His mind drifted to his personal life, his family, his relationships, the things he had sacrificed over the years for the sake of his companies. The pursuit of Mars, the drive for innovation, the vision of a sustainable future, none of it meant anything if it didn't also mean something to the people closest to him. Later that week, as Elon was preparing for a big announcement at Tesla's headquarters, he received a call from his ex-wife, Tallulah. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, but their relationship was one of those rare, complicated ones that couldn't quite be categorized. They had shared deep moments together, but the relationship had been tested by Elon's obsession with his work. "Elon, I've been thinking," Tallulah said, her voice soft but steady. "You've made a lot of changes in your companies lately, but I haven't seen you make any changes in your personal life. You've been so focused on the future that I'm not sure you're living in the present." Elon stood in the middle of his office, looking out at the view of Tesla's production line below. Tallulah's words stung more than he expected. He had been so consumed with work that he hadn't fully realized the toll it was taking on his personal relationships. "I know," Elon said quietly. "I've been working non-stop, and I've neglected a lot of things." "You're right. I'm not blaming you, Elon," she replied gently. "But you can't just keep running without looking at what you're running toward. You've got to make sure that when you look back, there's something, or someone, there. Otherwise, what's it all for?" There was a long silence. Elon didn't know how to respond. He'd always been driven by a mission so far-reaching that he hadn't stopped to consider the smaller, more personal connections that sustained a person. "I'll think about it, Tallulah," he said finally. "Thank you for calling." That night, as Elon lay in bed, his mind raced. The weight of the conversation with Tallulah didn't leave him. He had achieved so much in his career, Tesla was a household name, SpaceX was revolutionizing space travel, and the dream of colonizing Mars was becoming more of a reality every day. But he had never stopped to ask himself whether he had been building the right future, not just for humanity, but for himself. The next morning, he made a decision. Elon called Gwen, his trusted partner in innovation, and asked her to meet him in person. When Gwen arrived, Elon didn't waste any time. "Gwen, I've been thinking a lot about my approach to leadership and life," he began. "I've always been all in on the mission, but I've neglected the people around me. I want to do something about that. I think I've been moving too fast in certain areas, and it's time to slow down and rethink how I'm balancing things. I want to create a space not just for innovation but for real, human connection." Gwen listened carefully, sensing the sincerity in Elon's words. "Elon, I've seen the impact you've had on people, your teams, your employees, but I also know how much you've given up personally. Maybe it's time for a change. A recalibration, so to speak. What did you have in mind?" "I'm going to take some time off from SpaceX and Tesla," Elon said, surprising even himself. "I want to focus on personal growth and relationships. It's time to shift my perspective and understand what truly matters, not just in the companies I lead but in the life I'm living." Gwen nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of his decision. "That's a big move, Elon. But I think it's the right one. You've built these incredible companies, but you're right to ask the question of what it all means. The world will still need your vision, but you can't pour from an empty cup." Elon smiled slightly, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a step backward, it was a step forward in a different direction, one that required introspection. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was about to embark on something that wasn't just about rockets or electric cars, it was about him. Elon took a break from his usual high-stakes schedule. For the first time in years, he spent time with his children, reconnecting in a way he hadn't before. He took walks through the quiet countryside, visited museums, and read books on philosophy and human connection. His world had always been dominated by his ambition and the pursuit of technological achievement, but now he was learning to find fulfillment in simpler things. He spent hours reflecting on his childhood, the formative years that had shaped his desire to push boundaries. Elon had always been fascinated by the idea of greatness, but he was beginning to understand that greatness wasn't just about achieving monumental feats, it was also about the moments that made up a person's life along the way. And as the weeks passed, he noticed something changing in himself. He no longer felt the same pressure to be everything to everyone all the time. He began to see that he didn't have to sacrifice his personal life for his mission, and that it wasn't selfish to focus on the people who mattered most to him. Eventually, Elon returned to Tesla and SpaceX, reinvigorated and with a new perspective on life and leadership. He was still committed to changing the world, but he had found a way to balance his personal well-being with his professional ambitions. When he walked into the Tesla factory, he was greeted by his team with a renewed sense of camaraderie. The changes they had made were still in full swing, employee engagement was at an all-time high, and productivity was through the roof. Elon knew that the culture shift was still in progress, but he was beginning to see the long-term effects. As he spoke with employees, he felt a deeper connection to them than ever before. The work they were doing was important, but so was the work they were doing on themselves. And that, Elon realized, was the key to the future of his companies. The weeks following Elon's decision to step back from the whirlwind pace of his companies were a turning point in his life. The quiet mornings spent walking through parks with his children, the long conversations over dinner with friends, and the rare moments of reflection at home had slowly begun to reshape his worldview. No longer did he feel the suffocating pressure to constantly push the boundaries of technology. For the first time in years, Elon was allowing himself to just be. He'd learned that greatness didn't always come in the form of grand projects and groundbreaking inventions. Sometimes, greatness was about making small changes, building stronger relationships, and taking the time to appreciate what mattered most. But as the time off neared its end, Elon knew that the world would continue moving forward without him. The projects at Tesla and SpaceX still needed his input, and the race for Mars was not waiting for anyone. Yet this time, his return would be different. It wasn't just about continuing his legacy in the tech world, it was about balancing his personal life with his ambition for a better future. He knew he would need to make more adjustments. The world of high-tech innovation was not one that allowed for long pauses, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed, someone who could drive forward while also embracing the humanity behind the technology. Elon's first return to Tesla was subdued, a stark contrast to his usual dramatic entrances. He wasn't here to make headlines, he was here to reconnect with the people who had helped build the company from the ground up. Walking through the production floor of the Gigafactory, he took time to speak with engineers and factory workers, many of whom had never seen him up close before. "Hey, Elon," called out one of the employees, a young woman with a bright smile. "Glad to have you back. You've been missed." Elon smiled back, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. He had always been the figurehead, the driving force behind Tesla, but now he was starting to understand the real heart of the company, the people. As he made his way through the factory, he was struck by the camaraderie and energy that filled the space. People were working hard, but they were also connecting. They weren't just employees, they were part of a shared mission. He spent the next hour talking with several workers, listening to their stories about the progress they'd made and the challenges they faced. It wasn't just about production lines or deadlines, it was about their vision for the future. Elon, one of the lead engineers, said, "We've been able to push the boundaries on battery technology. The new cells we're developing could change everything. We're talking about energy storage on a scale that could make solar power a real replacement for fossil fuels." Hearing this, Elon's heart raced. This was the kind of breakthrough that he had always dreamed of, something that could genuinely shift the global energy paradigm. But unlike in the past, his excitement was not accompanied by the same obsessive drive to rush forward. This time, he could hear the team, understand their needs, and support them in a way he hadn't before. "Let's keep pushing on that," he said, his tone calm yet filled with purpose. "But make sure you're taking the time to care for each other. Progress means nothing if it comes at the cost of the people making it happen." Later that afternoon, Elon sat down with Gwen at a quiet table in the Tesla headquarters. It was an unusual setting for him. He typically preferred high-energy meetings, surrounded by whiteboards and digital displays, but today, he felt he needed to reflect. "Elon, you seem different," Gwen said after a few moments of silence, her eyes scanning him as if trying to gauge his thoughts. "I know this break has changed you, but do you feel ready to dive back into the fire?" Elon took a deep breath. "I do. But not in the same way I did before. I've realized that the key to the future is not just what we build, but how we build it. We need to put as much effort into the people behind these technologies as we do into the tech itself." Gwen nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a big shift for you, Elon. But it's a good one. I think it's exactly what Tesla and SpaceX need." "It's what I need," Elon admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I've spent too long obsessing over the big picture and neglecting the small moments, the connections with people, the importance of slowing down when things feel out of control. I've built great companies, but I've also realized that to sustain them, I need to take care of the people inside them. Not just push them harder." Gwen smiled. "That's the Elon Musk I think the world will need in the next decade. A leader who understands the bigger picture and the human element in it." Elon's newfound perspective began to take shape in the days that followed. The meetings at Tesla, while still demanding, took on a different tone. His team noticed the change. Elon listened more, asked more questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the well-being of those around him. He encouraged open dialogue about not just the projects they were working on but how they were feeling about their work and their lives. It wasn't just a shift in leadership, it was a shift in vision. Elon began to talk more openly about the importance of a work-life balance, not just for himself but for everyone at Tesla and SpaceX. He encouraged his team to take time off when they needed it, to reconnect with their families, and to nurture their own personal growth. He wanted to create an environment where people could bring their best selves to work, without sacrificing their personal happiness for the sake of a deadline. And as the months passed, Elon began to see the benefits of this approach. Productivity remained high, but morale was even higher. Employees who had once been on the verge of burnout were now energized and excited about the future. They were no longer just working for a paycheck, they were working for a cause. They were working because they believed in the mission, and because they felt supported by their leader. A few weeks later, Elon hosted a company-wide gathering at Tesla's headquarters, something he hadn't done in years. It was a chance for him to speak directly to his employees, to share his thoughts and vision for the future, but also to acknowledge the journey they had all been on together. He stood before them, not in a suit and tie, but in a simple black t-shirt, a far cry from the typical image of the tech billionaire. The room was filled with faces, some familiar, some new, but they all shared the same purpose. "I've spent a lot of my life building things that I believed could change the world," Elon began, his voice steady and full of conviction. "But what I've realized is that it's not just about the things we build, it's about the people we build them with. Every breakthrough, every new idea, is driven by the work, passion, and dedication of the people behind it. Without you, none of this would be possible. And without your well-being, none of this would mean anything." The room fell silent. It was the first time many of them had heard Elon speak so openly about his personal growth and the direction he wanted the company to take. His words weren't just a reflection of his own journey, they were a call to action for the entire team. "I want us to keep dreaming big," he continued, "but I also want us to do it in a way that respects and honors the people who make those dreams possible. We can achieve more when we take care of ourselves and each other. The future is bright, but it's one we can only build together." As the crowd erupted into applause, Elon stood there, a slight smile on his face, realizing that he had just taken a giant step, not just as a leader of companies, but as a human being. The journey to Mars, the future of sustainable energy, the world-changing technologies, none of it would matter if it wasn't grounded in something more fundamental: people. This was the future he was working toward, a future where innovation and humanity coexisted, where leadership was defined not by how many goals were achieved, but by the relationships that were forged along the way. It had been months since Elon had first made the decision to step back, and now, as he looked out from his office at Tesla's headquarters, he saw the progress of his transformation reflected in the company around him. Tesla had never been stronger, nor had its culture been more alive. The work-life balance, the deepened relationships, and the focus on holistic growth had brought a level of creativity and innovation that Elon hadn't anticipated. His decision to prioritize human connection over pure productivity had proven itself in ways he hadn't expected. But the truth was, Elon still felt that nagging sense that there was more to be done. He had tackled the internal culture, made adjustments, and prioritized the well-being of his employees. But there was a larger question looming in his mind: how could he take these lessons, the balance between human connection and technological advancement, and apply them to the greater global challenges? It wasn't enough to merely improve Tesla or SpaceX's internal operations. The real challenge now was how to translate this new way of thinking into solutions for the world at large. How could humanity as a whole benefit from the lessons learned within the walls of these companies? One afternoon, as he was speaking to Gwen about some upcoming changes at Tesla, the conversation veered into a new direction. "Gwen," Elon began, looking over a stack of reports. "What if we could not just change industries or nations, but the way the entire world thinks about progress? I'm talking about building a global framework, an infrastructure, around human-centered innovation. One that not only strives for environmental and technological advances but fosters the same kind of compassion, collaboration, and balance that we've been building here at Tesla." Gwen paused, considering his words carefully. It was an ambitious idea, one that sounded far-reaching, even for Elon. Yet, in her heart, she knew that he had always had a knack for turning seemingly impossible dreams into reality. And this idea? It could be the next frontier. "That's a bold vision," Gwen said, leaning forward. "But you're right. We've seen the difference it's made here. The way our people are thriving, both personally and professionally, it's incredible. If we could take this model and apply it on a global scale, we could change everything." Elon nodded. "Exactly. We've built a thriving ecosystem inside our companies. Now, imagine if the entire world was built on a similar foundation. What if we could set an example, a new standard, for how companies, governments, and individuals could come together to innovate, not just for the sake of progress, but with a focus on well-being, collaboration, and sustainability? Gwen's eyes gleamed with excitement. But how do we make that leap? How do we start building this global framework? Elon smiled, his mind already racing ahead. We start by leading with example. We continue to push the boundaries of technology with Tesla and SpaceX, but we also start building partnerships, public and private, that prioritize not just technology, but human flourishing. We integrate these values into every aspect of what we do, our business models, our research, our product development, and our outreach. It was a massive idea, one that could fundamentally alter the way the world approached innovation. But Elon was already thinking of the first steps. He began making plans to collaborate with governments, other tech leaders, and social organizations. It wasn't enough for him to just lead his companies. He needed to lead a movement. Months passed, and Elon's vision began to take shape. Through his outreach, he partnered with world leaders, international corporations, and grassroots organizations that shared his desire for a more human-centered approach to innovation. The new initiative, which he called the Human Future Coalition, sought to bring together leaders in technology, business, education, and social good to create a new global framework. But it wasn't just about writing policies or making grand speeches. The coalition was rooted in action. They began to create working groups that focused on everything from ethical AI development to sustainable energy solutions, from universal access to education to advancing healthcare for all. Each working group was built on the principle that innovation must always serve humanity's greatest needs: health, prosperity, and connection. Elon knew this would be an uphill battle. There would be resistance, from those who feared change, from those who believed in the status quo. But he was used to fighting battles no one else thought were possible. And this time, he wasn't alone. The coalition had already gathered some of the brightest minds from across the globe, all united in their desire to take the lessons from Tesla and SpaceX and apply them on a much larger scale. The first global summit of the Human Future Coalition was held in Geneva, Switzerland. Leaders from nearly every continent were present: presidents, CEOs, professors, philanthropists, all coming together to discuss this new approach to global development. Elon was a keynote speaker, but he was clear that the summit wasn't about him. It was about the ideas, the collaboration, and the vision for a better future. The venue was bustling with excitement. The energy in the air was electric. There was a palpable sense that something monumental was taking shape, a collective realization that the path forward required more than just technological breakthroughs. It required deep, systemic change in the way humanity approached progress. As Elon took the stage, the room fell silent. This was a moment. Not just for him, but for the world. Elon Musk, the man who's launched rockets and transformed industries, now turns his attention to global innovation. "What do you say to that?" a reporter asked. Elon smiled and answered in his usual straightforward manner. "I'm not here to just change industries. I'm here to change the way the world thinks about progress. For too long, we've focused on what's possible without asking whether it's sustainable or whether it's good for humanity as a whole. It's time for a new vision, one where technology and human connection are no longer at odds, but work together to solve our greatest challenges." The room erupted in applause. But for Elon, the applause wasn't what mattered. It was the conversations that followed, the questions, the debates, the breakthroughs that would come from the collaboration that was now underway. This wasn't just his vision anymore, it was the world's. As the summit concluded, Elon walked off the stage with a sense of accomplishment, but more importantly, with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was unclear, full of challenges and obstacles, but he knew one thing for sure: he had just planted the seeds for something far greater than any of his companies could ever be. The future of innovation, one that placed human flourishing at its core, was beginning to take root. In the days that followed, the world began to take notice. Headlines around the world picked up the story of the Human Future Coalition. Media outlets from every corner of the globe were eager to report on this new approach to progress, an approach that prioritized people over profits, well-being over productivity. Elon's commitment to this new vision was unwavering. He would continue to lead his companies with a focus on the bottom line, but now, more than ever, he was driven by something greater, the belief that true progress would only be realized when humanity, at its core, was thriving. Elon Musk stood in his office at the Tesla headquarters, watching as news reports continued to buzz across the screens. The world was reacting to his latest initiative, the Human Future Coalition. Governments, corporations, and individuals were beginning to recognize the immense potential of a future that balanced technology with human well-being. The summit in Geneva had catalyzed something unprecedented, but with that success came the inevitable scrutiny and challenges. A major meeting was scheduled with government leaders from several countries who had shown interest in supporting the coalition's mission. Elon had always been a visionary, but dealing with politics and bureaucracy was a different beast altogether. The challenge wasn't just about convincing leaders to sign on, it was about convincing them to truly change the way they viewed progress. He knew this would be a slow and difficult process, but it was necessary for the movement to gain real traction. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Gwen, his trusted advisor and right-hand woman. "Are you ready for the meeting with the international leaders?" Gwen's voice crackled through the speaker. "Ready as I'll ever be," Elon replied, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "This one's going to be tough. They have a lot of concerns about the pace of change. Some of them still want to hold on to the old way of doing things." "I know," Gwen said, "but they're also watching closely. This could be the turning point where the Human Future Coalition either gains serious momentum or falters." Elon took a deep breath. "I won't falter. But I have a feeling this is going to be more than just a discussion. We're pushing the boundaries of what's considered possible, and that's going to make people uncomfortable. We need to be prepared for a tough conversation." The meeting took place in a grand, glass-walled conference room at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Around the table sat representatives from various world powers, some of whom had already expressed public support for the coalition. Others were more skeptical, unsure whether Elon's ideas could be implemented on a global scale. Elon entered the room with his usual calm demeanor, but beneath the surface, he felt a slight tension. This wasn't about a new car model or a rocket launch, it was about the future of humanity. The stakes were higher than ever. He took his seat at the table and addressed the room. "Thank you for being here today. We all share the same goal, progress. But the question is, what does that progress look like? For too long, we've seen technological advancements come at the cost of human well-being. We've seen the environment suffer, and we've seen people fall through the cracks while we race toward the future. It's time we change that narrative." There were murmurs around the table. Some leaders nodded in agreement, while others leaned back in their chairs, clearly skeptical. "I understand your concerns," Elon continued. "You're all accustomed to the old system, the system where the fastest, most profitable innovations are prioritized. But that system is no longer sustainable. We cannot continue to prioritize profit over people. We need a new kind of global framework that integrates technology with sustainability, compassion, and collaboration." The room grew quiet, the weight of Elon's words hanging in the air. A representative from a powerful nation, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an authoritative tone, spoke up. "Mr. Musk, your ideas sound noble, but they're also very idealistic. We live in a world driven by competition, not cooperation. The economic pressures are real, and it's not enough to simply say we should change how things are done. How do you plan to make this new vision a reality? How do we get companies and governments to prioritize well-being over profit?" Elon met her gaze, unflinching. "By showing them that true progress comes when we invest in people, not just profits. We're already proving it at Tesla and SpaceX. Employees are more productive and innovative when they feel supported, when they know their well-being matters. The same goes for societies. When people are healthier, more connected, and more hopeful about the future, they are more motivated to drive change. The goal is not to dismantle capitalism, but to make it work for everyone, not just the few. The woman remained silent, but several others at the table were nodding along. Elon could feel the conversation shifting. Another leader, a young man from a rapidly developing nation, leaned forward. "Mr. Musk, I'm intrigued by your vision, but there are practical concerns. Many countries, like mine, are still working to catch up in terms of technology and infrastructure. How do we ensure that these changes are inclusive, and that they don't leave the less developed countries behind?" Elon smiled. "I've spent my career working on space exploration and clean energy. I know what it's like to try and make big ideas work, even when the resources seem scarce. But we must approach the future with a mindset of collaboration. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The resources are already there. What we need is global cooperation, shared research, and equitable distribution of technology. We have the tools to connect the world, to bring the power of clean energy, innovation, and technology to every corner of the planet. The key is making it accessible to everyone." The young leader seemed to appreciate the response. "So, you're suggesting a massive global investment in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and energy?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Elon replied. "But we need to start thinking about the world as a unified whole, not as isolated nations. The challenges we face are global: climate change, pandemics, energy crises, so our response must be global as well." The discussion continued, shifting between practical solutions and philosophical debates about the future of humanity. The room was filled with tension and uncertainty, but for the first time in the meeting, there was a glimmer of hope. After several hours of intense conversation, the meeting concluded. No major decisions had been made, but the seed had been planted. Elon knew that this was only the beginning. The real work would begin in the coming months, as the coalition worked to turn their ideas into actionable plans. But for now, he felt encouraged. There was a sense that the world was beginning to understand the importance of prioritizing humanity alongside technological progress. As he left the meeting, Gwen met him in the hallway. She could see the exhaustion in his face but also the spark of determination. "How did it go?" she asked. Elon paused, thinking for a moment. "It went better than I expected. There's a lot of resistance, but there's also a lot of interest. They're starting to see that this isn't just about innovation for the sake of innovation. It's about creating a world where technology is in service of humanity, not the other way around." Gwen smiled. "That's the future you've been working toward. It's not going to be easy, but I think you're on the right path." Elon nodded, his resolve hardening. "It's just the beginning. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Months passed since the tense meeting at the United Nations, and the world began to slowly shift in ways that Elon had never anticipated. The Human Future Coalition, though still in its infancy, had already begun to stir global conversations. Elon's message was resonating far beyond boardrooms and political halls. It was reaching schools, communities, and even everyday people. People were starting to demand change, and in some ways, this was more powerful than any technological breakthrough. But Elon knew that change was rarely easy, and now that the coalition had started to grow, there were new obstacles to face. Skepticism still existed, particularly among those in positions of power who were invested in maintaining the status quo. Some countries, worried about their own competitiveness, were reluctant to fully commit to the new framework. While others had their own agendas, using the coalition as a political tool to further their national interests. Elon had to tread carefully. The complexity of global politics was something he was no stranger to, but navigating it now required more diplomacy and patience than he had ever thought possible. As he stood before a room of eager young entrepreneurs at a global summit, he reflected on how far his ideas had come, and how much farther they still needed to go. The Global Youth Innovation Summit was held in Berlin, and it was the perfect place to gauge the true pulse of the next generation. Elon had been invited to speak on a panel with young leaders, scientists, and thinkers who were all eager to engage in discussions about the future of innovation. The room was filled with the buzz of enthusiasm, the air charged with a sense of possibility. Elon had often been lauded for his work with Tesla, SpaceX, and now his new vision for the world, but what he hadn't anticipated was how much this new generation seemed to have already absorbed his message. They were not only receptive, they were ready to push forward with ideas of their own. When it was his turn to speak, Elon stood and addressed the crowd. "Thank you for having me here. I'm not here to lecture or give another talk about electric cars or Mars," he began, drawing a laugh from the audience. "Today, I'm here to talk about something much bigger than any one company or project. I'm here to talk about the future of humanity." He paused for effect. "For years, we've been told that progress equals speed. Faster cars, smarter phones, more data. But what if true progress doesn't just mean faster? What if it means more connected, more compassionate, more sustainable?" The audience grew quiet, hanging on his every word. "We've spent so long trying to solve the problems of today that we haven't stopped to think about the kind of world we want to leave behind. If we're going to build a future, it has to be one that prioritizes the well-being of every single person on this planet, especially those who have been left behind." The crowd shifted, some murmuring to one another, others scribbling notes. Elon could see that his words were hitting home. It was a conversation he had started in the high towers of business, but now it was taking root in the hearts of the next generation. After his speech, Elon joined a panel with young innovators who had already begun implementing their own versions of human-centered tech in their startups. They talked about everything from ethical AI to universal access to renewable energy. The energy in the room was electric, and Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a hope that the world was finally beginning to see things the way he did. But not everyone was as optimistic. That evening, over dinner, Elon met with several key political leaders, including the leader of one of the most influential economic powers in Europe. The conversation quickly turned from polite pleasantries to a more serious tone. "Mr. Musk," the leader said, sipping his wine, "while I appreciate the sentiment of your initiative, I have to tell you that we remain cautious about your vision. You are asking governments to shift focus from economic growth to well-being, and that's not an easy sell. We need results, and we need them quickly. The world cannot afford to slow down." Elon leaned back, taking a moment to consider the weight of the words. "I understand that concern," he said, "but what you're asking for is unsustainable. We've been driving economic growth at the expense of the planet, at the expense of people, for decades. If we don't rethink our approach, we're headed for a crisis. The question is, do we want to build a future that is prosperous for a few, or do we want to create a world where everyone has the chance to thrive?" The leader stared at him for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke, his tone more measured. "We'll see how this evolves, Mr. Musk. But I'll be watching. The world's watching." The conversation stuck with Elon long after the dinner had ended. He was right, of course, progress couldn't be just about growth. It had to be about sustainable growth. But the political system was entrenched in short-term gains, and the push for quick results was a formidable adversary. But then again, Elon was no stranger to adversity. The tipping point came just days later. A massive breakthrough from a research lab at Tesla was unveiled, an AI-driven model capable of managing entire city infrastructures with an unprecedented level of efficiency, saving energy, reducing waste, and improving the quality of life for residents. It was a leap forward in applying human-centered design to urban planning, and it had the potential to transform how cities around the world functioned. The unveiling was a game-changer, and news outlets across the globe immediately picked up on the story. Elon knew that this was more than just a technical achievement. It was the proof that his vision was not just about ideas, it was about concrete, practical solutions that could be implemented today. For the first time in a while, the world seemed to be taking notice, and the pushback was starting to soften. As the momentum built, the Human Future Coalition received increasing support from a wide variety of sectors: technology, education, healthcare, and even politics. Several key nations, sensing the growing urgency for change, began aligning their policies with the coalition's goals. Companies, too, started to adopt the principles of human-centered design, embedding them into their missions. Elon had known this would be an uphill battle, but he had never doubted that it could be done. Now, the coalition was no longer just a dream, it was becoming a reality. The tipping point had been reached, and there was no turning back. The world was changing faster than Elon Musk had ever anticipated. As the momentum behind the Human Future Coalition continued to swell, the resistance he once faced began to wane, but new challenges emerged. The coalition's message had resonated far and wide, and the global community was finally beginning to embrace a future that balanced technological advancement with human well-being. But with this success came a new kind of pressure, one that wasn't just about pushing ideas forward, but about ensuring that the ideas would take root in ways that would outlast his own influence. Elon stood on the balcony of the Tesla headquarters, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a rare moment of stillness in the midst of chaos, and he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the early days of Tesla and SpaceX to the birth of the Human Future Coalition, every step had been a challenge. Yet now, with the world on the brink of a paradigm shift, he realized that this was only the beginning. The past few months had been a whirlwind. The breakthrough in AI-driven city management had set off a chain reaction. Governments had begun to integrate these new technologies into their urban planning, while businesses had adopted sustainable practices at an unprecedented rate. The world's largest tech firms, once focused purely on growth, now found themselves recalibrating their missions to align with the values Elon had long championed. Yet, despite the successes, Elon knew that it would take more than technology to transform the world, it would require a fundamental shift in how people saw themselves and their place in the world. The coalition had ignited that shift, but it was far from over. A press conference was scheduled in a few days, where Elon would officially announce the coalition's first global initiative, the creation of the Future Cities program. The program would focus on building cities from the ground up, designed with sustainability, well-being, and human-centric innovation at their core. The pilot program would begin in several countries, but it was a concept so transformative that it would take years, maybe decades, to fully realize. As he prepared for the announcement, Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another milestone. This was the kind of change that could define generations. The day of the press conference arrived. It was a bright morning, and the energy surrounding the event was palpable. Journalists from around the world had gathered, eager to hear what Elon would say next. Standing before the cameras, Elon felt a familiar sense of anticipation, but this time, there was something different in the air. The world was watching, not just as a spectator, but as a participant in the conversation. He began his speech, his voice steady but filled with emotion. For years, we've been told that the future is something we have to wait for. That progress is something that happens to us. But the future isn't something that happens. It's something we create, together. And today, I'm proud to announce that we're taking the first step in creating that future with the Future Cities program. He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. These cities won't just be smart, they'll be compassionate. They won't just be efficient, they'll be sustainable. They'll be places where technology serves humanity, not the other way around. Places where people aren't just part of the system, but are at the heart of it. The crowd erupted into applause, and for a moment, Elon felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about all of the people who had believed in this vision from the start, and all of those who would help bring it to life. It was about the future generations who would inherit this new world. As the press conference ended, Elon made his way backstage, where Gwen was waiting for him. She had been with him through every step of this journey, and her support had been indispensable. "You did it," Gwen said with a smile. "The world's ready for this." Elon nodded, but his expression remained pensive. "This is just the beginning. The real work starts now. We need to make sure this isn't just an idea, it needs to be a movement. A new way of living. I know, Gwen said. And you're the one to lead it. We've seen how much change can happen when people come together. We've got a lot of work ahead, but I think you've built something that can last. As the evening approached, Elon found himself back at his office, reviewing the final details of the Future Cities program. The next phase would require a level of cooperation between governments, corporations, and communities that had never been seen before. But Elon knew that this was the only way forward. His mind wandered for a moment, recalling a conversation he had with an old friend, a fellow innovator who had once told him that the hardest part of change was always the first step. Elon had taken that first step long ago, but now, as the world stood at the precipice of a new era, he realized that the first step had only been the beginning. The real challenge was in the follow-through, the commitment to see the vision through to the end, even when the road ahead was uncertain. The next few years would be a defining period in the history of the coalition. The Future Cities program would begin to take shape in pilot locations, and the impact of the technologies Elon had developed, clean energy, sustainable transportation, AI-driven infrastructure, would begin to transform the fabric of urban life. But the challenges would also continue to mount. Political resistance, technological limitations, and the sheer scale of the task ahead meant that there would be setbacks. But for the first time in his life, Elon understood something fundamental: change didn't have to happen overnight. It was about setting the right course, creating the right infrastructure, and allowing time for it to grow. He took a deep breath and turned his gaze toward the stars, as he often did when contemplating the future. The dream of colonizing Mars had always driven him forward, but now, he realized that the work on Earth was even more urgent. The planet's future depended on the choices made today. And with the Human Future Coalition, Elon was more convinced than ever that humanity was on the brink of a new beginning. A future where technology was not just a tool, but a partner in building a better, more compassionate world. As Elon prepared for the years ahead, he knew that there would be countless challenges along the way. But now, more than ever, he felt a deep sense of hope. Because no matter how difficult the path, he was not alone. The world was ready for change. And together, they would make it happen. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?